All right, you can see in there she's all browned up and it's bubbling in the corner. Crumb on the top and the filling in the side, and it's all sort of holding together, not falling apart. I love rhubarb crisp. Man. Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com, and by popular request, I've decided to show people how I make rhubarb crisp. And I don't make it like a lot of other people. It actually has a bottom crust and a top crust. A lot of people just put a top crust on, and they have this sort of wet mess underneath. And if you like that, great. But I like sort of nice, crispy, crunchy bottom crust, and almost like a pie, right? So I'm going to show you how I do this. It's not hard to do. So ingredients. We've got 4 to 5 cups of chopped rhubarb. You don't have to be fussy about that. It can be 5.5 or 4, whatever, right? Half a cup of sugar, which is just ordinary white sugar. That's for the fill, okay? For the crisp, you get a cup of flour, a cup of brown sugar, a cup and a half of oatmeal. You can even add more oatmeal. Sometimes I add a bit more, just because I'm feeling like I want it more oaty. Teaspoon of cinnamon, half a teaspoon of nutmeg, half a teaspoon of salt, and half a cup of butter. I'm going to use this vegan butter stuff because I can't deal with dairy. But you use the real thing. Unless you're a vegan or you're one of these lactose intolerant types. I got the oven preheated to 375. That's where you want it. And when we put this in, we're going to cook it for 50 minutes. So let's get at her here. I like to mix up the fill first. So let's get that going here. So I got this all chopped up. I picked this a couple days ago. I didn't have time to sort of do anything with it. But basically, all I do is I pick it, I cut it up, and I put some in the freezer, and put some in the fridge and use it up right away. There's 1 cup. I'm not being overly fussy here. I mean, yes, we're baking, but this is not like a souffle here. That's 2 cups. I'm sort of using like heaping cups, and I got stuff falling out all over the place. That's 3 cups. And this is 4 cups. All right, I'm going to go a little bit there. Basically, probably got about 5 cups in there, give or take, all right? All right, so we do this, and the sugar, half a cup of sugar. Almost out of sugar. You can use brown sugar for this part too. My recipe calls for white, but I think that's just mainly to save money, right? Because white sugar, generally speaking, is cheaper than brown sugar. This would be the other way around years ago, but I mean like a long time ago, right? Like a couple hundred years ago. But now the white sugar is the cheap one. Supply and demand, right? All right, so we got our mix. That's all you got to do for that. I'm just going to set that in this bowl over here and make a heck of a mess on the counter, just because I want to use this same bowl to mix the crumb. So all we got here is just a bunch of rhubarb covered in sugar. Okay? Okay, now we're going to do our crumb. So with the crumb, we're going to go with, where's my cup measure? Oh, here, we're going to grab a cup of flour. I just got regular all-purpose flour. You can use whole wheat or whatever you want. I find, the less sort of healthy the flour is, the better. This is all-purpose flour. And now these are the oats. I find these quick oats, I mean, this is a dessert. This is not a health food you're making here. I find the quick oats work really well because they're already, sort of broken down. So my recipe calls for a cup and a half. So I'm going to do that, but I might add a bit more as we go. Sometimes I think it's not clumping up. You sort of go by feel, and you decide how it feels in terms of its clumpiness. So we got a cup and a half of oatmeal and a cup of flour. Now I'm going to add a cup of brown sugar. All right, and again, I'm not being overly precise, because you don't have to be. All right, so that's close enough for me. Some things you do, but for this you don't. Not that sort of a thing. Okay, so I got the sugar and the flour and the oats. Sometimes the brown sugar has got like little balls or clumps in it, so I just like to use my hands here and just sort of work that a little bit. Get the flour and the sugar and the oats sort of evenly evenly distributed. Oh, so satisfying getting your hands in there like that. All right, just wipe my hands off here for a sec. All right. All right, now we're going to put our spices in here. My recipe calls for a teaspoon of cinnamon. I mean, this is just the recipe as I wrote it down. I tend to put a bit more of everything. A teaspoon of cinnamon. You can dial these things up or dial them down depending on your preferences and proclivities. It calls for half a teaspoon of nutmeg, so I'll put about that in. You can also use allspice for this depending on, you know, what you like. Calls for, you notice I'm using the teaspoon measure here, I'm just eyeballing it, right? But about half a teaspoon of salt. And we'll get that all sort of worked in together so it's all the same color, right? Just moving it around a bit. I see another brown sugar ball there. Get that all worked in. Okay, so we've added everything to the crumb here except the butter. And the butter you got to sort of work in, so I'll bring the camera in to show you what I'm doing. But here's what it looks like before we add the butter, okay? Almost looks like when you buy, like, you know, packages of pre-made oatmeal, you know, just add instant oatmeal. It looks like instant oatmeal kind of thing, right? And probably is, I guess, except you got the flour in there. Okay, so now I'm going to put the butter in. Then I'm going to bring the camera in and show you how I add the butter to the mix. And I'll show you how I do it, right? You do it whatever way works for you. All right, this is kind of messy. You're going to get your hands in there. It's kind of satisfying, I suppose, if you're the tactile type. So yeah, there's different ways to cut this in using a knife and a fork and that sort of thing. But I mean, all I do is I get it going with the spoon. I find this vegan margarine's a bit soft. It's not as stiff as butter. So butter works better. I mean, if you don't, you know, use real butter. And sometimes I'll use a combination of margarine and lard, like a quarter cup of the sort of vegan margarine and a quarter cup of lard. I mean, this is just advice for dairy-free types because the lard has this almost identical texture to butter, so it behaves when you're baking like butter. But of course, if you think lard's gross, or if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, the idea of using lard would be repulsive, so don't use it. All right, so anyway, all right. So I've got that about as far as I can get it just using a spoon, all right? So now I just get my hands in here. I'm sort of going like this, lightly. I'm not squeezing and squishing. I'm sort of just lifting and fluffing and kind of pinching it. I don't know what the right term would be. I'm basically lifting it and moving. I'm picking it up and sort of moving my fingers through it. Almost like when you're examining soil in the garden. Oh, that's good soil, right? So that's why I say it might feel good to some people. But anyway, what you're looking for while you're doing this is you're not going for perfection, but a somewhat consistent texture, right? So you're getting this meal would be the, little bits, balls and bits and in pieces, right? As opposed to clumps, and you don't want it fine either. You want bits, all right? And that's kind of where I am now. I'll just bring it up closer to the camera so you can see. I think that's good enough. You notice my hands aren't a complete mess, right? And it's because I wasn't in squeezing and squishing, which if you ever want to make nice soft cookies, don't follow the recipe, just squish it all with your hands and make really nice soft cookies. I should do a recipe on that too. But anyway, that's what we got. Looks like that. I could just eat that whole bowl just like that. I wouldn't feel good for the rest of the day. Probably most of the night, but I could eat that. Anyway, let's get her in the pan here. Show you what to do next. All right, now the trick for making a nice crisp. This works for apple crisp too, almost pretty much the same approach really. Just, I don't know if you add the sugar to, I can't remember my apple crisp recipe, but very similar technique in terms of the crumb. So what I do is I take more than half, I eyeball it, right? But I take about, let's say 60% of the crumb and put it on the bottom. What happens, I mean, you get a nice crunchy crust on top, but because you got this right on the bottom of the pan, it's gonna sort of crisp in a different way. almost like a pie crust, right, underneath, right? Take a little bit of that out. Just want to make sure I got a little bit of that out. Just want to make sure I got enough eyeballing here, but you're going for just over half on the bottom, okay? Then with a fork, you move it around. This is what I do, right? I move it around. Remember, when the thing gets hot and you start really cooking the crisp, the rhubarb and that sugar, it's going to liquefy. All right, so what I do here is I tamp this down with the fork. I make it almost like you're making, something with graham crackers, I just go around. This is almost the way I would actually tamp a garden down with a rake when you've just turned soil over, right? So I've just pushed this down, right? So it's reasonably stiff, okay? That'll make a fantastic, nice crust underneath. Okay, now we put this stuff on top. And some recipes say to actually cook this fill on a skillet before, but you don't have to. You can just do it like this. It's going to be in the oven for 15 minutes. So, I mean, the fill is going to soften. It's going to cook. It's going to break down, especially at 375, right? And of course, that temperature, 375, that's relative to sea level, right? I live in Nova Scotia. We're never more than a half-hour drive from the ocean anywhere in the province, and I don't live on the top of a cliff. So I am above sea level, I don't know, maybe 100 meters at the most, right? But anyway, that's just so you know, if you're inland and well above sea level, you might want to adjust that upwards, right? All right, just put this on top, right, this crumb. And just sort of deftly distribute it around. If you want to get fancy, you can put a little cinnamon on top of there, just to give it a little extra of that. Really depends on, your taste, if you like extra cinnamon. This is my first rhubarb crisp of the year, so I'm just going to go with the classic recipe. Notice I'm not pushing this part down. I just moved it around. So the top should be light and sort of, light and airy, not compressed. Okay, so I've just moved it around so it's completely covered the rhubarb, but that's all I got, okay? And when this comes out, it's going to be almost like squares when you cut them out, almost like a date square. This is exactly how I cook date squares too. Anyway, let's get this in the oven. All right, so we got that in a 375 oven, middle rack, for 50 minutes. We'll see you in 50 minutes. Have a look at it then. All right, the timer's gone out, so the timer's gone off. It's been 50 minutes, so let's take her out and have a look. All right, you can see in there she's all browned up and it's bubbling in the corners, which means, to me anyway, that the rhubarb has sort of gotten soft and kind of liquefied and is nice sort of mushy rhubarb, right? So you got the nice crispy crust on the top, you got the nice crummy crust on the bottom, and then the soft, tart yet sweet because it's been sweetened rhubarb in the middle. All right, so this is too hot to try right now. And I don't like my rhubarb crisp super hot. Some people like it hot, and like hot rhubarb crisp with ice cream, like vanilla ice cream sort of thing. Anyway, I like it cold. I guess I can have it hot sometimes, but for getting it out of the pan, it's a lot easier to wait until it's completely cooled down. Anyway, it's too hot to try right now, so I gotta wait about an hour or so for this to cool down. If you're making this to serve to people, I would make it about an hour before the meal so it can cool down properly. But I mean, this all comes down to your personal preferences and that sort of thing. I find if you give it a good hour to cool down, or even more. If I lifted this out of the pan right now, it would sort of fall apart, right? But if you wait and let it cool down, the rhubarb, the mushy rhubarb sort of thickens up and becomes almost like a jam, right? Whereas right now it's just a liquid, right? So I find it better for serving up if you let it cool. But that's all personal preference type thing. I mean, this smells really good. The house smells really good. I can't wait to get into this in about an hour. So we'll see you in about an hour. All right, it's not really time for dessert, but we'll give her a taste anyway, just because that's the way we got to end the video. So we'll measure her out here. Good portion. show you what it looks like when it's prepared this way. Hopefully I don't butcher this getting it out. Always a dicey operation. Let's see what we can do here. There we go, not bad. Let's see here. See how that stays together? So we got sort of like crust on the bottom and the nice crumb on the top and the filling in the side, and it's all sort of holding together, not falling apart into a big mess on the plate, right? So, in my opinion, that's how rhubarb crisp should be. A little bit of vanilla ice cream or something like that would be perfect with this. Well, let's just give her a try as is. And crunch on the top, crunchy on the bottom, and tart in the middle. Crunchy sweet top, crunchy sweet bottom, tart in the middle. I love rhubarb crisp. Man. Almost all the rhubarb in my garden. This is how it goes. Goes down the hatch. Anyway, that's how I do it. Give it a try. Let me know what you think. I think this is the best way to make it, personally. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Until next time, get out there, get at it. Have fun in your garden. Have fun in your kitchen. Thanks for watching.